Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as you do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts and other stuff they're involved in. My guest today is a lifelong martial artist who's been training nonstop since 1986. He studied and trained in Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, Muay Thai, Judo, and wrestling. In 2012, he earned his black belt in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and is now a third degree. In 2015, he co-founded Sheepdog Response with Tim Kennedy and has since traveled the country training military, law enforcement, and civilians in life-saving skills. He's also an NRA-certified pistol instructor and an Oklahoma Self-Defense Act instructor. As the head instructor of Sheepdog Jiu-Jitsu in Tulsa, he combines his knowledge of striking, grappling, and firearms training to prepare students for worst-case scenarios. He continues to develop and lead programs including women's self-defense, everyday civilian preparedness, and high-level tactical training. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. Blake Hayes. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. I appreciate you taking the time. I know how busy people's schedules can get, and anytime they're willing to carve out a little time and do an interview, I truly appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, what we do with all my guests, now I mentioned you've been training since 1986, but I want to know what led to that. I want to know where that first interest in martial arts came from, maybe, that first spark that kicked off your interest in your journey in the martial arts.
Yeah, for me, I think it was the first Karate Kid movie.
Nice.
Went and saw that and was like, oh man, I got to learn this. And I can't really remember if I'd seen like Bruce Lee movies and stuff like that before that, but I know around that time I became pretty immersed in watching Kung Fu movies and karate movies and stuff. And I think Karate Kid kind of kicked that off. And then my grandmother got me and my brother membership to a local karate school and got us gis for Christmas. And so then we started out doing karate. And so that was our first kind of entree into it. Okay. My dad was into boxing. He didn't really like boxes growing up. He was involved in other sports, but he was a fan of boxing and kind of, boxed around with his friends, I think, and stuff growing up. So was always pretty into that and kind of got started doing boxing training as a kid as well. And so just kind of blended it all together.
So did you start doing the boxing before you started doing the karate?
No, karate would have come first. It's outside of just putting the gloves on with my brother and friends and banging it out maybe before, before 6. But
nice.
Yeah, we did that a lot, just kind of have boxing gloves. And every time somebody'd come over, we'd just box and kind of try to figure out how tough we were.
So that first karate school, do you remember what the style of karate that was?
It was pretty general. It was called Arlington Karate Academy. And, they didn't really tell us at the time that it was a particular style of karate, but looking back and kind of knowing what they taught, pretty just generic karate, I would say. I don't think they really leaned, into like Shotokan or, anything like that, any particular style. I think just kind of basic karate.
Okay. And what are some of your first thoughts, maybe those first few classes? What was it, like some things you maybe enjoyed or some things you remember about that instructor?
Yeah, Mr. Bremer was his name, I remember. And I remember thinking he was probably like a superhero or something because he's a black belt in karate and he was teaching all these people.
Nice.
And I remember him being a good instructor and a good guy from what I can remember. And, we got to put on the foot pads and hand pads and headgear and start sparring pretty early. And I like doing that. They had tournaments and stuff. And
they did?
I just remember them kind of teaching a few little basic, techniques that I was able to use on my friends when we were goofing around and stuff. So it was definitely fun.
Okay. And how long did you stay at that school?
I would say a couple years probably. I got kind of more into boxing after that.
And you mentioned tournaments. Did you get into the tournaments at that age?
I did, yeah. Me and my brother always did pretty well at it, point karate, and we would just kind of, again, I was kind of blending what I was learning, just watching boxing and being somewhat involved in it even at an early age. And I would just kind of keep my hands up and throw straight punches, just kind of a straight blast, you would say in martial arts, right down the middle and run forward. And a lot of times the other kids were trying to do blocks and, more advanced techniques. And I was just blitzing them, and just getting up. All I had to do was touch them and I'd win a point. I remember the parents in the stands sometimes weren't too happy. They're like, he's not even doing karate. And my dad was like, he's winning. The boy, you're supposed to touch him first. He's hitting him first.
Nice.
So,
do you remember your very first tournament you entered?
I remember doing that. Like I remember like my dad telling me just keep your hands up and go straight forward and throw 1-2, 1-2, 1-2 until you score, and doing that. I remember once or twice somebody'd kind of move backwards and throw a side kick at me and maybe land that first if they, obviously kicks have a little longer range. But I just remember doing that, and I remember people kind of being like upset about it. But then also remember the Mr. Bramer saying, "Hey, if it works, it works. It's punches are part of karate." So he wasn't mad about it, and that's all I cared about because I felt that he was the kind of the authority figure.
It's actually kind of cool. And did you only compete in the sparring? Did you ever do like forms or weapons training?
No, I didn't do that. I don't think they really had. They may have had like kata. I think I remember learning some kata, but I never competed in it.
Okay. And then you said after a couple of years, you decided to focus on boxing for a while?
Yeah. I kind of, after that, I would always like, there are, back then we had the phone book, and every time the phone book would come out, a couple of martial arts schools would open up or fall off. I would always look as soon as a new phone book came out and see what do they got now, Wing Chun Kung Fu or Hapkido or whatever, Combat Sambo, whatever they were offering, something new. I would go try it. I'd get my mom to take me there, and I'd go try it. And then I would honestly just be like, hey, I would want to spar pretty quickly and figure out if it really worked against just kind of, like I said, just straight punches and coming forward and not being fancy. And a lot of times I'm not going to like disparage any particular art, but I never really found one that would work against just kind of coming forward with your hands up and being pretty aggressive and throwing lots of punches. A lot of times it seemed like they were more used to kind of a back and forth kind of give and take, softer sparring, which I understand better now. As a kid, I just thought the purpose is to win, you know what I mean? And so I probably didn't give some of those arts as much of a chance as I should have, because I was just like, well, at the end of the day, I can do this one thing that seems to work pretty well. And so I would kind of gravitate back towards that. And not to skip ahead in the story, but that really happened until I was boxing in, like I'd say 1993 was the first UFC. But shortly thereafter, there were some guys in my gym that I was boxing at the time that were also doing like MMA, the very first UFCs. So I got a chance to try it out against them. I got to try to box against them while they were trying to take me down and do submissions, and it was a complete mismatch. I mean, we couldn't even hit them. They could take us down and put us in leg locks and stuff. And so that was the first time I tried another style of fighting, and it was more effective than boxing. And then I continued to box after that, but I also became pretty obsessed with trying to learn grappling and that, submission fighting, because I realized that it was so effective if all you knew how to do was stand up and throw punches like I was at the time. So.
Now, did you ever do any actual boxing like competitions? Did you do any matches?
Yeah, I did. I did some competitions growing up. I, was also playing like baseball, basketball, football, and stuff like that. So I'd have times where I would be off into the season for a while, and then I'd go back to the gym and then kind of be back in sports. But kind of settled more into it like in high school years, kind of tried to make that my number one sport. I hurt my knee playing football in like the 9th grade. And so after that, I kind of focused more on I wasn't playing any other sports that gave me more time to box. But I always kind of like thought, unlike most boxers, like that of boxing as a martial art, like I wanted to learn how to fight, defend myself. And, so I was almost less concerned with the sport than I was with just learning how to use it and apply it in like a self-defense situation. So,
yeah. So did you do like Golden Gloves type stuff, or?
I did, yeah. Okay. I fought in the Golden Gloves in Dallas. I was from Arlington, Texas, and they had the Fort Worth Golden Gloves and the Dallas Golden Gloves, and our gym would just compete in Dallas. So that's why I went there. It was in the Fair Park Coliseum back then.
Okay.
Pretty fun. And actually went back there recently for a concert with my kids and wife, and almost gave me kind of like a flashback feeling, like driving onto that, into the fairgrounds and being like, oh man, like I used to fight here, you know what I mean? And so it was like, it was kind of fun to go there and not have to fight the toughest kids in Dallas when I was there, Nice. Watch Dave Matthews.
Oh, nice. Didn't have to fight for a good spot at the concert, huh?
No, luckily we had reserved seats. So
completely off topic. I've always wanted to see Dave Matthews. I had one chance one time and I couldn't get out of work, and I'm hoping he comes back to my area again. But
yeah, I've seen a lot of bands that are considered highly touted live, and I would say that they're the best of anybody I've seen. And I've seen them over the years, since from the 90s forward. I'm not like following them around the country, but I've probably seen them 10 times over all those years. And most recently was just about, less than a year ago, and they were still as good as they've always been. Okay. You always wonder, as people get older, if it's been a while, if they're still going to be any good, but in that case they are.
Yeah, I'd never heard of him. And a friend of mine back in the 90s was in an a cappella group. This was like 1997. And they sang the song Ants Marching.
Oh, wow.
And I had never never heard it before. And then they're like, oh, this is a song by Dave Matthews. I'm like, who? And they sang it. That's a cool song. So I started looking up Dave Matthews. Like, he's got lots of good stuff. So yeah, that's kind of cool. I'll have to add that to my list. Cool. Maybe I'll see if he's coming anywhere near me in the next year. So
yeah, I would highly recommend it.
Cool. To back up a little bit, you talked about going and trying out different schools every time a new one popped up. If you had to estimate, how many different styles and different schools do you think you tried over that time period?
Probably 5 to 7, something like that, where I would go there and just kind of try it out. Some of them I would kind of like, I'd call and they'd say, the classes didn't fit the schedule or it was too far or something. But, usually I would go try it out if I could. And if they would let me spar, I would stick around and try that. So.
Okay. Then you mentioned obviously the UFC in 93 and then, getting involved with doing some like MMA type training. So before the UFC, had you seen any kind of grappling arts before that other than like wrestling?
Yeah, I'd seen some wrestling, not much, because honestly, where I was growing up in Texas at the time in the 80s and early 90s, it wasn't nearly as popular as it is now. I live in Oklahoma. I moved to Oklahoma in 1998. And it's like a religion here, but so I didn't see much of that. And I honestly thought growing up that whoever was the heavyweight champion of boxing was the toughest guy on the planet, until 1993. That was my belief that Mike Tyson or whoever, Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis could beat anybody up. And I thought if a wrestler, fought one of them, they'd just knock them out before they could get hold of them. And I was not correct about that.
I remember they tried to get Tyson to fight Royce Gracie, but they were only offering him like $100,000 or something. He's like, yeah, no.
Yeah, that's the thing. People talk about that as a possible matchup at the time, but at the time, that was right around the time Mike Tyson got out of jail, and I think he made like $30 million to fight Peter McNeely.
Exactly.
So, the UFC couldn't afford him, and why would he agree to go fight with no rules and a style he wasn't, used to for $100,000? I think they gave Royce like 50 or 60 grand, maybe something like that for running the tournament. So it was not wouldn't have been on Mike Tyson's radar for sure.
Yeah. Tell you, I remember having those conversations with my buddies in my martial arts class so many times. We're like, just give Tyson, 6 months of ground training. And actually all of us agreed that we thought he could have gave Royce a run for his money. So yeah,
if he could stop the takedown, I don't think 6 months of ground training would be enough to beat Royce on the ground, but
yeah.
If you just taught him 6 months of avoiding getting taken down and he could keep the fight on the feet, he would have a good, better chance for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Interestingly, Mike Tyson has always answered that question that he thought he would get trashed in the UFC.
Yep, I've seen that in some
Everyone else gives him more of a chance than he does, but he was an amazing athlete. There's no question that, he would have been, would have excelled in any combat sport if he put the time and effort into it. He had a great mindset.
If one of those punches would have connected, the fight would have pretty much been over. So.
And I know Royce a little bit. He comes to my gym and teaches seminars. He's coming back in October.
Nice.
And he's a nice guy, but also I was just having this discussion online recently with somebody questioning whether, what would happen if Royce and Mike Tyson fought. And they were like, well, Mike Tyson was mean. He would just bite him. And I was like, I could guarantee you that Royce would bite him right back. He was as mean and determined to win a fight as anybody when he got in there. So he's a very hard man.
That's awesome.
And Gerard Gordeau actually did bite him in the first UFC, and that's why he held on to the rear naked choke for a long time after he tapped at the end of the match in the finals. Yeah,
I forgot about that one. Okay.
So he didn't bite him back, but he did choke him for a long time after he was tapping.
Nice.
I'm jumping around, but I remember being at lunch with Royce one time, and I've had some pretty tough guys that are MMA fighters that in the early days of MMA, they would have those 8-man or 16-man tournaments, usually only 8-man, but Royce did win one that was a 16-man where he had to beat 4 guys in one night.
Wow.
Which is just insane. But I've had a couple guys that signed up for an 8-man tournament and they'd win the first fight, but then once they went and laid down and the lactic acid started setting in and bruises started swelling up, they'd be like, man, I can't go out there and fight again. I can barely walk on my leg and my neck got hurt, and they'd be like, I'm not physically fit, I'm not hurt, I'm not well enough to fight again. And I gave him this long-winded question where I explained that guys I thought were tough couldn't do it, and how did he steel his nerves and body to go out there and do that 3 or 4 times in a night? Yeah. He looked up and says, he goes, man, I didn't even think about, he was like, the bell rings, I go. He said, you put the devil across from me, I'll go kick his ass. And he just kind of chuckled and went back to eating. And you could tell that was his mentality. It was that simple. It was like, I'm going to go here and I'm going to fight.
That's awesome.
And, he did have one fight where he was hurt, where he was so tired that his corner ended up throwing the towel in. They had to bring him into the ring for some reason. That was after he fought chemo. And he couldn't continue in that tournament. But he was trying. I mean, it wasn't his decision. He was on his feet and he was telling them, I can't see, I'm dizzy, but they could just tell that he wasn't fit to go out and fight. So I should say that some people might listen to this and say, well, he didn't go through that whole tournament, but he sure tried. It wasn't up to him. So he was out there on his feet, and if the bell would have rang, he would have fought, believe me.
Oh yeah. Those first, probably 7 to 10 UFCs, man, those were some wars.
Yeah. And size is a huge factor in a fight. I mean,
Yes.
of course, jiu-jitsu was able to overcome bigger guys. He fought Ken Shamrock in the first one, who had some grappling experience and, was kind of the king of the pancrase, stuff over there in Japan at the time. So he was familiar with the style, unlike most people, but he was still able to win that fight against Chemo, who was a significantly bigger, stronger guy. But generally, that's a lot to ask. And I think sometimes that's underestimated what Royce did there, because I've heard people say, oh, any blue belt in jiu-jitsu could have won that because nobody knew how to grapple. Well, first of all, that's not true. There were guys like Ken Shamrock being the most obvious one that knew how to grapple. But number two, a fight is a fight. You know what I mean? And going in there with no time limits and basically no rules, you couldn't bite or poke in the eye, and that was it. You could strike the groin, you could pull hair, you could kick people in the head on the ground, which is the first UFC fight that happened where that sumo wrestler got his tooth kicked out. And so a 176-pound guy, the smallest guy in the tournament, going in there and winning consistently in tournaments where he had to fight more than one person, certainly had its effect on me. The first time, I didn't want to believe it. I was like, there's no way this guy can roll around on his back and beat all these guys. And I was like, we need there was a boxer in the first one, Art Jimerson, who fought Royce, and he had one glove on, and he tapped out as soon as Royce got the mount on him, because he could just tell, if this guy can sit on my chest, obviously he can punch me in the face and I can't stop it. But he ended up learning some jiu-jitsu after that, which I thought was cool. And Chemo ended up getting a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And quite a few of those guys went on to start training jiu-jitsu, which I thought was neat, because I think that's the correct mentality. And this is obviously a martial arts podcast. Like, I think if you're serious about the martial part of martial arts, then you got to be honest. If you have an experience, like I had Anthony Macias, who fought in some of the early UFCs. I think was responsible for the last time they let him fight with no weight classes, because he ended up getting matched up against Dan Severn, who was like 100 pounds heavier than him. And he got slammed all over the cage, not because he wasn't a good fighter, but anybody who weighs 160 pounds is pretty much going to have that happen to. Royce ended up fighting him, in the tournament, and was able to beat him by triangle choke, which again was extremely impressive, because that was several UFCs in. And Dan Severn was a national champion wrestler and 100 pounds heavier. And he knew what Royce was going to try to do, and had prepared, with other people who know submissions to try to stop it. So, but anyway, I was at a place called The Gym in Arlington, Texas, and we had a boxing team there, and they actually built a cage in there to train for the early UFCs. And Scott Morris, who's on UFC 2, trained there. And he and some other guys were doing this thing called Robert Bussey Warriors International, RBWI, which was like kind of a ninjutsu style back at the time. And so Scott Bussey, the Busey, depending on how I've heard people describe it both ways, owned that gym in Arlington. And so his brother is Robert. So they taught that style, and Scott Morris was there. And so they were training for the UFC, and they built the cage with the intention of, they kind of understood early, which I think is absolutely correct, that the cage is kind of an element that has to be addressed, because it changes things a lot when you're pushed against the cage, or when you push someone against the cage.
Yeah, definitely.
So, they built that, and Oleg Tektarov, who was living in Dallas at the time, came in there and trained a few times. And Anthony Macias was down there teaching basically like MMA classes. And he came over to our boxing team at one point and said, hey, would you guys just go in the cage and throw punches at me, and I won't hit you or kick you. I just want to try to take you down and see if I can put a submission on you, and I won't hurt you. And he was probably in his early mid-20s or something, and we were teenagers. He was very respectful, but he was kind of couching it like, I'm going to make sure you guys don't get hurt. And then he walked off, and he'd given us these little gloves that were kind of like the Chuck Norris gloves you could buy at Oshman's at the time.
Yep, I remember those.
And that's exactly what they were, literally, in fact, the Chuck Norris glove. And I remember my friend Elliot, who was a really good boxer and a pretty good street fighter, too, for a guy who wasn't specifically trained for it. He looked at those gloves and looked at me and said, I'm going to kill this guy. He's going to regret volunteering for this. He's going to let us punch him with these gloves. And he said, you guys can do whatever you want. Punch, kick, put me in a headlock, whatever you think will work. And he would just shoot a takedown and put us on our butts, and then fall back into like a straight ankle lock or a heel hook. And just, he did it every time the exact same way. He'd take us down, fall back, put us in a leg lock. We couldn't get up. We couldn't move. We'd have to tap out. We'd try harder. Same thing would happen again. And it was exactly what I'd been looking for when I went to all those other different martial arts schools, and even what I wanted boxing to be, which was just kind of an inevitable result,
Yeah.
If you try anything else against me and I do this, this is going to win. And I became convinced that we could fight 1,000 times and he could put me in a submission all 1,000, So it was an eye opener for sure. And then Mike Bussey owned that gym, and he started giving me some lessons in jiu-jitsu. I wanted to learn it, and he would just meet me for like an hour. And I was a kid, so I didn't have much money. And, I said, can I pay you to do this? And he said, well, how much could you pay me? And I said, like $20. And he was like, okay. And I don't think he did it for the money. I think he just wanted me to have some skin in the game, that I had invested in the time to do it. So,
okay.
So I learned some of that stuff, and then I continued boxing through high school, and then graduated from high school and moved to OU, started over up here kind of.
And what was the first martial arts school or martial arts style you found at OU?
So there was a guy named Conan Mincy who was a kickboxer, and I had a gym in Norman, which is where I live, and that's where OU is. And he, again, more kind of a kickboxer, but did have kind of a boxing program. And initially I thought I would just kind of probably keep boxing, but just kind of a different, I had been in like a really competitive, like strictly boxing environment, and it was more like kind of a kickboxing gym. And so it was pretty different, probably better at kickboxing and maybe not as heavy on the boxing side at the time, So just kind of, I was used to having people my size and my age that were really competitive, and it just kind of also got into college and all that stuff and pledged a fraternity and had school and things to do. And so just kind of ended up wasn't really available in Norman, the kind of thing I was doing in Texas. So I just decided I'd kind of move on. So for a few years, I was just kind of, open to possibilities. I guess I probably needed a little break after all the years of playing sports and doing boxing and stuff. But yeah. I went into the mailroom at my apartment in like 2021. I'm talking about 2001, not 4 years ago. And they had a flyer on there that said Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and some other stuff. I just remember it being Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I didn't think anything like that existed up there. I'd have been doing it all along. So it was at USA Stars, which is in Moore, which is one town north of Norman. And so I went there and signed up for the jiu-jitsu program. And then they actually had the guy that ran that at the time and still does is Pat Burris, who was an Olympian in judo.
Yeah. Okay.
And he had Ron Tripp there, who was a really high level guy, and some other like younger guys. Brian Piccolo, who was an All-American wrestler and then was on the alternate on the Olympic team in judo, was training there at the time. He's now a black belt under Rafael Lovato in jiu-jitsu. So there's a lot of good guys there at the time. Actually, Frank Trigg, who fought in the UFC, was training there at the time, and so was Evan Tanner.
Wow.
He fought Tito Ortiz for the title while he was training there, and then after he lost that fight, he moved, I think, to Las Vegas. No, I think to like Oregon, actually, like Gresham, Oregon, to train with Team Quest.
Okay.
But yeah, so that was another kind of breeding ground for a lot of guys that were kind of similar minded, maybe doing slightly different sports, whether it was jiu-jitsu, judo, MMA, but pretty tough group of guys there at the time. And so did jiu-jitsu there, started there. And then once I started there, I've never stopped doing jiu-jitsu for any period of time.
How long did you stay at that specific school?
I was there for maybe a year and a half or something. There was a guy named Scott Hewitt who was there, who taught on alternating days between another guy named Ty Gay. And both are still close friends of mine and people that I look up to in jiu-jitsu. And Scott left and started his own gym in Norman, so it was a little closer to my house. And so I started training there. And then Ty left and started his own gym in Edmond, which is, probably 35, maybe 40 minutes from the OU campus. So I wasn't able to go there as often, but I still train with him and still like a close friend, almost like a brother to me after all these years. We talk all the time and still train together. So I moved to Titan Martial Arts in Norman and trained there the rest of the time. I stayed for law school.
Okay.
So I trained there through 2005, and then I got a job in Tulsa when I got out of law school and moved here in 2005 and been here ever since.
And did you find a school in Tulsa to train at originally, or how long did it take you to find
it? I did, yeah. By that point, there was no question I was going to be doing this stuff for the rest of my life. It was just a matter of finding the right gym for me in Tulsa. And there were a lot of good gyms here when I came already, or at least a few people who were doing grappling. It wasn't really like a standard like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu program. When I was in Norman, they were associated with a guy named Leonardo Xavier, who was a traditional Gracie Jiu-Jitsu guy, came from the Gracie Muay Thai Academy, and
Mm-hmm.
Rio de Janeiro and had recently moved to the U.S. to start a jiu-jitsu association. And so he became my main instructor, who was the person I would get promoted under and stuff. Even though Scott was my day-to-day instructor at the school, he was both of our instructor, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I would fly to, first he was in New Orleans, and then he moved to Sugar Land, Texas, where he still is. I would fly there and take lessons from him and train with him. And so when I came to Tulsa, there wasn't like a gi class that was doing traditional jiu-jitsu and stuff like that at the time. But I went to a few schools and ended up meeting up with a guy named Bo Taylor, who was teaching at Apollo's Karate.
Okay.
Dale Cook, Apollo Cook, who's pretty well known up here. He's a fight promoter and was a champion kickboxer and all that. He was in the documentary Choke with Hicks and Gracie.
Oh, okay.
He was kind of the guy that was training another guy named Todd Hayes. But they showed the Apollo's Karate in that documentary and stuff. And so it's kind of cool to go there and train. And they had traditional karate there and then kickboxing and MMA. And then they had another guy named Matt Wyman who was training there when I first moved up. And he ended up fighting in the UFC from shortly after that to recently, in the last few years, was his last fight. He had his whole career there and was a pretty well-known lightweight.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hooked up with those guys and trained and kind of showed them some of the jiu-jitsu stuff that I'd learned and boxing that I'd learned over the years. And Bo was a wrestler who had good jiu-jitsu and kickboxing, and Wyman was pretty well-rounded. And then we had lots of other guys join us. We ended up starting our own gym called Tulsa Top Team. And out of that, we'd had several guys that went on to fight in the UFC and have good careers. And some of those guys own gyms around here now, and we're kind of just all helping each other.
What do you think led you down the teaching path? What made you want to become a martial arts instructor?
It's a good question. So around that time, it's a timely question too, because I had just graduated from law school and had what I thought was a pretty good job. And, about a year into moving here, started dating my wife and spending more time with her. We got married about a year after that. Started having kids and everything. So I was a little more, I guess, settled down than some of the other guys that were at the gym, and they were still fighting, and really trying to make it as pro MMA fighters. And so it was easier for me to be like, well, I'll run the practices. I had a lot of experience through boxing at kind of running a good practice that really blended conditioning with technique and staying on task and making sure we were getting the most out of an hour or 2 hours of training. So I just kind of got pushed to the front because I would show up on time and teach a class, and those guys kind of needed to be the student rather than the teacher because they needed to be doing all the rounds and getting all the reps themselves, so I just kind of defaulted to doing it, just to kind of turned out that way.
And when was the decision, or kind of what led to the decision to open the own school?
So that was a long time later. That was when a Tulsa Top Team was around 2006, maybe about a year after I moved here. We started that, but that wasn't owned by me, and it was just kind of wasn't really for commercial purposes. It was just kind of a fight club for guys that were trying to be good at fighting, and we just meet up and we just all contributed enough to kind of pay the bills.
Okay.
So from there, I got hired by Mikey Burnett, who was a early UFC fighter as well.
Mm-hmm.
Him and Mark Wayne Mullen, who actually owned the gym, who's now a senator here in Oklahoma. He was a wrestler when he was younger and was a friend of Mikey's. And so he started a gym called Oklahoma Fight Club. And Mikey taught the no-gi classes and MMA classes, and I taught the gi jiu-jitsu classes. So we'd have, Mikey would be in my class, and then I'd be in his class, and we'd all train together. And so that was a fun place to train for a few years. And then I ended up moving. I've just moved around to a couple different gyms over the years, closer to my home, or somebody, was trying to start a program and needed the help or whatever. And so it was only 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago to the day, probably like end of September of 2021, where I finally started my own gym.
Oh, okay.
And just got to the point where I thought it would be a good time. I was, kids are getting older and they're kind of here doing activities all the time. And instead of traveling and teaching like I was doing more seminars on the road and stuff, I thought I'd just try to kind of lay roots down. So,
okay. Think back to, one of those first few classes where you just kind of said you got pushed to the front and ended up teaching all the way through now where you're running your own school. What do you think has changed the most about your teaching style over all those years?
It's a good question too. So when I first started, I really just tried to parrot what other good teachers had told me. I was like, okay, I've had good instruction. I need to just say what they would say, remember that how they taught me the armbar and say it word for word like they said it. And I think that probably is the right approach when you're newer, just emulate somebody who's better at it than you. And then over time, I kind of started realizing that there were things that I was doing that I wasn't saying that actually worked, that made it work for me. And that was because I would be trying to teach it to someone, and I would realize that maybe the 3 or 4 steps that I was taught are the big picture, but if you get down to the cellular level, there's some other things going on. And I think the people who taught it to me would eventually have gotten into those details if you had more time to discuss it with them too. But it's, you got to start somewhere. So they give you 3 or 4 things, the major things to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So I eventually kind of shifted more to just trying to explain what I actually do instead of trying to repeat what I was told. Try to keep what I was told as a baseline, but make sure there's not any kind of secret sauce in there that I'm leaving out.
Yeah, definitely. So over all those years, was there ever a time when you considered trying to, get into the UFC or get into MMA?
When I was younger there, when we had some guys fighting at a really high level, and I felt like, in sparring, things would go pretty well for me, which doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not saying I would win. I'm just saying it's competitive. And it occurred to me, but I honestly, at the time, the amount of money that they were making fighting in the early days of the UFC even, and let alone local MMA, was just not worth the time that I would have had to take off of work and away from my family to train for it. And it just didn't make sense. I just felt like the career that I was on was something I could do when I'm 60 or 70, and you definitely can't do that in fighting. And
yeah,
no matter how good you get, eventually you're going to have to find something else to do,
Definitely.
And to be fair, I'd say just to be humble and honest too, that I could tell at the time, just like it was in boxing, that I'm pretty good at fighting, but there's a level of athleticism, speed, reflexes, all that are world class that I don't have.
Right.
And I knew, at the time when I would have been making that decision, I would have BJ Penn or Matt Hughes or something as the UFC champion. And those are the only guys that are making any money. And you look at those guys and think, am I honest with myself? Could I train to beat those guys? And maybe not, somebody's got to be the best in the world. You know what I mean? It's like if you play basketball, eventually you fail to make the high school team, or nobody wants you to play on their college team, or you don't get drafted into the NBA, and basketball's over whether you like it or not. It's the same with most sports. But in professional fighting, if you can fog a mirror, there's somebody that'll let you go in there and fight.
True.
I could be fighting. I could be having my 200th pro MMA fight at age 45 this weekend at the local casino, and nobody would stop me. But
true,
probably wouldn't have been the best use of my brain over the years, and I might not have a whole lot to show for it, to be honest. And so you have to, I think if you're a martial artist, and even if you're into MMA, you have to be honest with yourself, especially at that time. Like, are pretty good fighters making enough money to support their family and save enough money where they can retire? Are only the very best guys doing that? And then if they are, then whereas with a lawyer, you have thousands of people who are making a good living.
Yeah.
And you got a dozen in MMA, then you're just like, what are my odds here? And if have a family, which I did, is it worth it to me to chase fighting when it's probably not the most likely scenario for me to be able to, successfully provide for my family? So also, if you're that rational about things, you probably shouldn't be a cage fighter anyway, because at the point when you're thinking about that to that level, there's probably guys out there who just want the prize and they're not thinking that way. And so they probably would beat you up anyway because they're not as, concerned about their safety or their longevity.
Yeah, I know. We had a one of our local fighters that actually made it to the UFC up here out of a gym in Fargo, North Dakota, young guy. And he ended up through a few UFC, I think he had 4 or 5 UFC fights, but in 2 of the UFC fights, one of them he got, I think, fight of the night, and one of them he got submission of the night. So both of those were like $100,000 bonus. And he basically, after 2 more fights, lost his UFC contract, took all that money and moved to, I think, Oslo, Norway, and never fought again. So he was used the money to set himself up and just relax and not get hit anymore.
That's not bad. Yeah, I had some fighters win bonuses in the UFC, and then all their friends and relatives hit them up for a loan or an investment or something, and before you know, they don't have any of it left. Plus, sometimes people fail to tell them that you owe a third of that at least in taxes, and they'll go out and spend it all, and then all of a sudden they got a big tax bill and they don't have the money to pay it anymore. So there's a lot of things that you don't learn in pro fighting that would probably be a good thing if hopefully have somebody who's a little more experienced to give you advice.
I used to judge local and regional MMA fights. I did it for probably a decade, maybe a little more. And I think in all those years, the most I ever saw a local fighter making a fight, I think, was like $5 or $6,000.
Yeah.
To some people it seems like a lot, but also I saw guys fighting for, before the commission was put in place in 2006 in this area, I saw guys fighting for $50, $100. And I'm like,
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've certainly, no disrespect to those guys. I know that they're not doing it for the money. They're doing it for the hope that they'll make a lot more money someday, or they're doing it because they like the sport and they want to test themselves, all of which are valid reasons, but this wasn't my reason. and having competed in boxing, and then I competed some in jiu-jitsu, like it was just kind of, I didn't have the itch to go out and fight and, prove myself. I felt like I kind of knew where I stood as far as competition went, and
That's
ready
good.
to move on to family life.
Smart. All right, talk a little bit about Sheepdog Response, kind of what led to starting that and what's that about?
Okay, so I also train firearms, and that was I should say that around the time I got my black belt in jiu-jitsu, I'd always back up and say that one of my biggest influences in martial arts, if not my absolute biggest, would be Orlando Wall, who has a gym in Arlington where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And once I figured out that he had a gym in Arlington, I started going there and training when I could, but I just wasn't home very often, so I didn't get to train like regularly.
Yeah.
So then whenever I went to USA Stars and more, I was able to do that. And he was, I don't use the term master lightly, but I would say already a master in karate and a brown belt in jiu-jitsu when I met him. And so he's very well-rounded. He's also a big guy and very flexible, very athletic, and super amazing, like, kind of what you would want in a martial arts instructor. He's like Yoda, he's very wise, holds himself with the utmost integrity, treats everyone with the utmost respect, and is just, a guy you can really look up to, has the total package as a martial artist, far beyond just being a tough guy.
Nice.
And so he's the guy that's kind of taken over my jiu-jitsu training officially, kind of after I got my black belt. I just wanted to really train with him and have his influence, and so I kind of switched to him, and we've been training together again since way before that, but that's when I really switched to, wanting him to be the number one guy in my journey, and have the availability to get down and train with him more often and bring him up here and things like that. He actually, my dad, mentioned before, was always a tough guy and a good, wasn't looking for fights, but could always protect his family. And, he did a little bit of that karate stuff with us when we were younger and liked it. And when I got into jiu-jitsu, he would be like, I see that stuff on TV. Like, you really think, like, if I lay down and grab my arm like this, that you could, like, put me in one of those arm bars and extend my arm away from my body? And I'd be like, yeah, I mean, it's just leverage. I'm like I'm like deadlifting through your bicep, so there's no way you can stop it. And we'd lay down and I'd do it, and he'd be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that works. I'd show him some moves and he'd be like, oh my gosh, this is just like, you're like playing like a cat playing with a ball of string. So eventually in like his later 50s, he was like, I really, I need to go all in and learn jiu-jitsu. And I was like, well, there's only one place you could go, and that's Master Wall. And you need to go to his school. And he was like, well, there's closer places. I was like, it doesn't matter. Like, drive 30 minutes, you get what you pay for. So he started training with Orlando Wall, and he ended up earning his black belt in his late 60s.
Nice.
So he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. My wife's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and my kids are too young to be black belts, but they're on their way.
Nice.
So I'm pretty passionate about it. Anyway, jumping around, sorry. But I was at a private lesson with Master Wall once, and he was just going to go out to his car, which was parked right outside the door at the curb, to grab something. He's actually giving me a neck knife, hang around your neck under your shirt, and, have it on the sheath that you can just reach up and grab it pretty quickly.
Yep.
And he was going to kind of explain the application of that to me. And I noticed that he wasn't trying to make a show of it, but I noticed he went over and slipped inside the waistband pistol into his gi pants before he went outside. And I said, you carry a gun just out to your car right there? And he was like, yeah. I was like, well, you're a pretty tough guy. Do you really think you need that? And he was like, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And I was like, okay, well. So we talked about it a little bit. He said, look, I'm a martial artist. I believe in self-defense. And out here, there's people with guns. And if they have one, I have to have it. Because in the old days, you might have a sword or a bow staff or whatever in martial arts. And the current weapons of the bad guys are guns and knives. And so we have to know how to fight with a gun and a knife, and you got to train it just like you do your jiu-jitsu and your wrestling and your boxing, and you have to be serious about it. And if you want to be serious about self-defense, or you could have a 10-year-old kid standing over there and he could shoot you, wouldn't be able to do anything about it.
True.
And so I realized, like, man, I really have to learn this. And, he said, as the master that I'm following, that it's important to train with weapons, which I agree. So started doing it and learned a lot from him. And again, he's, down in Texas and family man himself and runs a great school down there. So he doesn't want to travel very often. And I started kind of getting interested in, I was very interested in, when would you draw a gun versus when would you just go hands-on, and where's kind of the gray area, and how can we fight with this gun and pull it out and not be worried that it's going to get taken away from us and all this. So Tim Kennedy was fighting in the UFC at the time and also was a Green Beret, and we had some mutual friends. And so I asked him to come up and just do a seminar with us to kind of we did half the class on the mat doing weapons retention and takeaways and pulling rubber knives and guns on each other and fighting over them. And then the other half of the day we did on the range, where we were doing kind of close quarter shooting and tactics for gunfights and stuff in a civilian capacity. And it went well and everybody liked it. And so I said, maybe we should do more of these, because I think there were some police officers there who said they got a lot out of it for their job. There were a couple of military guys there who said there were things that they hadn't learned in the military that they wish they had. And there were a lot of civilians who appreciated it. So I said, let's try to do these in places where it might help people. And the other idea was that we could start, if it worked, we could empower some other instructors who had similar backgrounds, who understood this kind of subtopic and would be willing to do it if we could set the classes up. And so it would be an opportunity for people who couldn't go to war anymore to still be able to use their skills to teach and not, have an avenue for it, and, a decent way to make a living. So we did another one in Austin where he lives, and it was successful. And we started the business and launched a website and had an online store and all that stuff. We did started online training. So the the company still exists 10 years later. I sold my portion of it. Me and him were 50-50 partners, and I sold my half to him in 2018.
Okay.
My kids are getting a little older, and I just wanted to stay home and enjoy life with them and not have to be traveling 2 weeks out of the month. And so it was a good time for me to get out of it. And that was really my goal from the time I started it, was to get it built up and sell it, for a profit. Kind of was his at the time, but it ended up being more kind of like so associated with him that it would have been hard to separate him from it.
Yeah.
He ended up wanting to stick around. So anyway, it's doing exactly what I wanted it to be doing. There's a lot of great people there that are working there that fit the bill exactly to what I said, that have a ton of experience and training. And there's really the only applications for that are teaching in the military or teaching outside of the military. And there's not a whole lot of avenues unless you start your own company and try to get noticed. And, we were able to build some pretty good visibility over time where people knew that was a good place to go for training. And then now there's a lot of instructors that are making a living doing it that are well qualified for it. And so Sheepdog Jiu-Jitsu is my gym here in Tulsa. And that was the name of the program before I started my gym, even though I was teaching at other people's gym. That's kind of how I distinguished my jiu-jitsu, which was, again, from Orlando Waugh. Gave me that analogy way before I heard it anywhere else. He was saying, there's wolves in the world and there's nothing we can do about that. And, they're always been there and always will. And what we can do is, as sheepdogs, is we can be almost kind of hidden in the pack, and they don't know until we start fighting back that we're not just one of the sheep, that we have claws and we have teeth and we can fight just like they can, but we're just willing to lay right next to a flock of sheep all day and never hurt them because we have morals,
Yeah.
But understand we could tear them apart, but we don't. And the only way we're going to fight is if somebody tries to hurt them. And so it was something that made sense to me and kind of fit with my observations of the world that, that was true. And when I first started doing martial arts, it was because I wanted to be able to defend myself. I didn't want people to beat up on me or hurt me. And I wanted to have what I saw in the movies. You could just kung fu your way out of it. And then I think the second thing that occurs to you, or should, and this is really what I teach my students, this progression, you get good enough to defend yourself. I think that's the baseline. And then if you want to have a family or people that are weaker than you, at least for a period of time, and you want to protect them, then you should be good enough to protect other people, which is a higher level of expertise in martial arts than just being able to protect yourself, is being able to protect yourself while protecting someone else. And then I think if you want to take it a step further, then you start teaching other people to have that power as well, whether it's just teaching your family or your friends or people you care about, or you want to go out and teach people at a school where you wouldn't know them if they didn't come to you for training.
Right.
And I've kind of gone through that progression of just wanting to be able to protect myself in school when I was a kid, to like seeing other people getting picked on and being like, well, I know I could beat that kid up if I needed to. And so I'm just going to step between me and them and go, hey, if you want to fight this kid, now I want to fight you. So if you start hitting him, I'm going to start hitting you, and it's going to get crazy pretty quick. So why don't you just keep your hands in your pockets, And luckily that, most of the time in school, I didn't have to fight very much because people knew I knew how to fight. And they'd be like, oh, come on, Hayes, I don't want to fight you. Why are you being like this? Because you're picking on this kid who can't fight. He doesn't want to fight either. So what's the difference? You don't want to fight me. He doesn't want to fight you. So let's just not fight.
Nice.
And I think that's the obligation. And that's what I teach. We've got some kids that come to us because they are being bullied and they're, maybe feel weaker, or maybe they are smaller and weaker, or have some disabilities that other kids don't have that might pick on them. And I think we can level the playing field for them where eventually they can defend themselves. I know they can against a bigger, stronger person, maybe that doesn't have the same shortcomings that they have that they started out with.
Right.
But also we have kids come to us who are some of the biggest and strongest and most athletic kids in their grade. And they're coming to us because they want to be challenged and they want to learn how to fight too, even though they are big, strong kids. And so I tell those kids, look, you're going to learn to be able to defend yourself pretty quickly. Probably nobody wants to mess with you already.
True.
But what needs to happen is you need to make sure that nobody gets picked on. Like, I'm not saying put yourself at, an unnecessary risk, but with great power comes great responsibility. You're going to be the toughest kid in your school, so nobody should get picked on around you,
Definitely.
Just say, hey, knock it off. You know what I mean? You don't have to beat them up. You just have to tell them that you're on that guy's side and you're not going to let him get away with beating them up, and they won't do it,
I like it.
If they do it, they won't do it more than once, and neither will several other people who witnessed it.
True.
And you have the right, even, like I said, I'm an attorney, and, some people don't realize that, at least in Oklahoma, you definitely have the right to protect other people to the same extent that you could protect yourself.
Nice.
It would be warranted to punch that person to defend yourself, then you can punch that person to defend the other person that's in the same amount of danger. I think that's a moral obligation if you have the ability to do it. And not everybody agrees. And I'm not saying you should jump into every situation and that you couldn't potentially make a situation worse. But sometimes there's just an obvious disturbance in the force that you could change, and you should,
No, I agree. That's cool. So over all your years of training, what's your worst martial arts related injury?
Oof. Let's see. I mean, I've had things that kind of wear and tear over time, not really an acute injury, luckily.
Yeah.
This is another thing that's just kind of an interesting thing about training your whole life, is that I was just telling somebody the other day who started in his 50s. He's an athletic, tough guy. He's worked in the health club, working out industry and stuff. And so came in strong and in shape, but hadn't done anything like this in a while. And, he was saying, I don't know how, there's me and another couple guys that are older in the gym that don't seem to ever get hurt. And I don't know how you guys don't get hurt. I feel like I'm banged up all the time. We certainly try to keep those guys safe as best we can. But I think the answer to that is, when I was learning to fight, everyone was little like me. And so they couldn't really hurt me because we didn't have the horsepower to do it. We didn't have a lot of body weight. We didn't have a lot of punching power.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time I was going against full-grown adults, I kind of knew how to defend myself well enough where if I'm in a position where I think my knee's going to collapse, I can move, I can get away, I can defend, or just go to the ground or whatever and use my guard. And so I would hate to try to learn all this stuff kind of in live action if I didn't already know how to defend myself. And I'm 45 now. I'm probably a lot easier to get hurt than I would have before, but because I can defend myself pretty well, it's not as dangerous as it would be if I was brand new to it. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's lucky for kids that start when they're kids, that by the time they're adults, they're already pretty experienced martial artists, and you're less likely to get hurt if you know how to protect yourself in training. So, but I've had a few, here and there, my neck is, a little jacked up. I'm not sure if it wouldn't have been regardless, just genetically or something, but
yeah.
My fingers, I guess, are probably the biggest ones from gi training. I've got a couple of kind of digit injuries, I guess you'd say, that are nagging.
Okay.
Not too bad.
That's a question I just started asking a year ago, and I'm not sure if I'll keep asking it because a lot of people have had none. It's really shocking. People have had no martial arts injuries.
Yeah.
It kind of goes a gamut from nothing to I broke my back. I fractured yeah. So it really varies, but it's good.
Yeah, philosophy wise, I've kind of realized too, as I've gotten older, I used to train really hard and spar really hard when I was younger. And I used to think that, you're not going to be able to do this when you're older, but when you're younger, it's okay. And I really do think, even though I was training people, I think for kind of the ultimate combat, at least, as far as the contact, it's hard to beat MMA for getting slammed and kneed and shin kicked and elbowed. I do think you can learn to do that successfully without sparring 100% under MMA rules every day, and I don't think that's good for you to do that. And at the time, that's kind of what we did when we were younger, and I think there's better ways to do it. I think you can spar at a more measured pace and just kind of slow things down, and if you're more mature, you can get a lot out of it, and then you're not beat up all the time, and you're not hesitant to spar because you're not just completely going to war every time.
So you mean when you're 18, you're not indestructible?
No, but you think you are.
Exactly.
And, I have a guy right now who teaches at my gym who's 22, and he's an absolute tank. And just today I was teaching class, and I was saying, well, his name's Nani. I was like, grab Nani and do that because my neck hurts. I don't want you to do it on me. And then I said, well, hang on. I was like, so when I was 22, I was the one that everyone would grab, and now my neck hurts, so maybe we shouldn't grab him. When he's 45, his neck's going to hurt,
Exactly.
Just grab me. Mine's already messed up, so. I got to learn to intervene in that loop and not let the young guys just feel indestructible and jump in there and volunteer their bodies. We just need to be like, nobody needs to get hurt regardless of their age.
I know, because I'm 51, and when I go back and help out with my instructor's class sometimes, and he'll be like, he's like, just remember, because he's seen me go back before when I've taken breaks and stuff because of family stuff, and he's like, and I've gone back and I've pushed it too hard and I've hurt myself, and he'll always remind me, he's like, just remember, he said, you're a black belt, you've done all this stuff before, you have nothing to prove. He's like, I'd rather have you healthy for the next few weeks instead of injuring you on your second night back. So
I have to say that to my guys that come back as well, that, hey, you know, you're such a valuable resource to people in here. Make sure you don't get hurt so you can keep coming back, because it's not as much about proving yourself at this age. It's just paying it forward and helping others, you know?
Yeah, I think part of it's a little bit of that ego. Like, you know, you don't want to look bad in front of these young students.
100%. Yeah.
So,
you still remember how you used to be able to go in there and run through everybody, and you feel like you still should be able to, and maybe you still can, but it just might hurt more tomorrow. And so it's probably not worth it.
I actually want to be able to get out of bed on my own in the morning. So
yeah, working smarter and not harder is a good thing to shoot for as we get older.
100%. All right. I have a few fun questions we use to wrap up the interview. So I know we talked about, you know, about the possibility of you fighting MMA over the years, and you never really did that. So let's say you decided you were going to. What would your walk-up song be? What music's playing as you're taking that walk into the cage?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably depends on the day.
Yeah.
Give Me Shelter by Rolling Stone, maybe.
Nice. I like that one.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I think a few people have picked the Stones before, but not that song. I think one person picked Paint It Black, I think.
Okay. That's a good one, too.
All right. Who are 3, 4, 5 names you'd put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts?
Hoist has got to be on there because he, to me, had the biggest impact on one night that anyone's ever had.
Definitely.
I've told him that several times, and he says, no, it's my father. He's the one, you know, all I did was follow his advice. But I'm like, well, for me, he was in the broadcast, but you're the one who fought. So
yeah,
for me, it was that. And I would say, you know, maybe to him, I'll put his dad on there instead of him, but he was the one that introduced me to his dad by what he did, his dad's work by what he did. So 3, 4, 5, I mean, like, MMA is big for me just because I think it kind of proves what really works. George St. Pierre is a great martial artist, also a great karate practitioner, and I think he sort of embodies the martial arts spirit. I think some people are fighters, but they're not martial artists.
Mm-hmm.
And that distinction means more to me with time, you know, kind of how you represent yourself and, you know, if you're a good role model, and some people could care less. But I think if you can manage to hold yourself to as high a standard as George has done, that's something to aspire to. Hickson Gracie also, you know, going with 2 Gracies, but he was a big influence on me. You know, I've got to train with him a lot, and just philosophically, kind of like I said about Master Law, he's just such a smart guy, makes a lot of good comparisons and, you know, things about jiu-jitsu that nobody else told me that works really well.
Nice.
Bruce Lee, I think probably for his influence, you know, maybe not as much what he could, you know, what his modern capabilities were, although I'm confident understanding. I read the Tao of Jeet Kune Do and his philosophy of martial arts, and I think he would have been a big fan of just figuring out what works. He kind of advocated for that, you know, we just need to have tournaments with no rules and see who wins.
Yeah.
I think he would have done, he already had just doing some judo with Jean LaBelle, and I think he would have jumped on the grappling train and would have been great at it.
Agree.
So, and he, you know, he may, if there's anybody who had a bigger influence on the trajectory of martial arts than Hoist, it might have been him, because he got so many people interested in martial arts just with his movies and the way he carried himself. Yeah. I think that karate school that I went to in the 80s that was already open before the Karate Kid came out might not have existed if it wasn't for Bruce Lee, you know?
Right.
Even different styles, I think people maybe looking to fight like Bruce Lee and they see a karate school, they're like, okay, that's close enough. It's martial arts. Let's go, you know?
Yep.
And I think a lot of those people probably did get what they wanted. They wanted to learn how to punch and kick, and, you know, it didn't have to be Wing Chun, Kung Fu, or Jeet Kune Do. And yeah, I mean, I love martial arts, so it's a tough call. You know, there's Chuck Norris is kind of right up there too for the influence he had culturally, and he was, you know, fought competitively, which I always admired. But yeah, those guys are probably on my Mount Rushmore.
That's a solid Mount Rushmore. And I know you talk about the Bruce Lee impact. That's one conversation I've had with a lot of my guests, is like those during like certain time periods, basically in world history, U.S. history, these impacts and these things that launched kind of martial arts into the mainstream. And talked about Bruce Lee, talked about the Karate Kid, talked about the UFC.
Yeah. I'll say one more that would be on my Mount Rushmore that a lot of people don't consider boxing a martial art, but it is
Definitely.
in the way that they fight. So I would also go with Muhammad Ali because he was a huge influence on my life and was like my hero growing up. And me and my
Nice.
dad would watch his fights over and over again. And I got to meet him when I was a teenager.
Oh,
And
wow.
he was as advertised, and he had obviously just a massive global impact as well, and helped all athletes, make more money, and all martial artists. And so he would definitely be up there for me as well, and just combat sports and the impact that he had, and just how great he was as a fighter. I mean, he was like one in a trillion.
Yeah, agreed.
He was really young.
That's a stacked Mount Rushmore.
So quick and so athletic. Yeah, it'd be a tough room to win a fight in, for sure.
Exactly. All right. How about a favorite martial arts book?
Yeah, for me, that would be let me go grab it so I remember the exact title of it. But Renzo Gracie and John Danaher wrote Mastering Jiu-Jitsu, I think it was called. I've got it on my shelf in here. Yeah, Mastering Jiu-Jitsu. That's my favorite martial arts book.
I've heard of that one. I've never read that one. So
yeah, it's old now. I think it came out maybe early 2000s, late 90s.
Okay. I just ordered one of Hickson's. I think is it Hickson's newest book, but is it Breathe? Is that the book?
Yeah, Comfort in Darkness is the newer one, I think, and Breathe is the first one.
Yeah, I just ordered Breathe. So
yeah, that's the first one, and that's got a lot of good stories and anecdotes in it. I like that one a lot.
Nice. Looking forward to reading it when I actually have time to read. So we'll see.
Yeah, he's a pretty amazing guy. There's kind of two people that I've met in my life, both of whom I put on my Mount Rushmore, that were not only great fighters, but almost had like an aura about them where like if they walked into a room and you didn't even know who they were, you would be like, something unusual about that guy. And those were Muhammad Ali and Rickson Gracie. Both of those guys were almost like floating in air when they walked in. I was just
That's cool.
Maybe it was because of the reverence that I held them in before I ever met them, but they seemed to like really be different, like really have a greatness about them that it's hard to put a finger on, but you can tell it when you're around them.
Yeah. All right. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
Oh, favorite martial arts TV show. There haven't been a lot that I can remember, but I know like Walker, Texas Ranger was kind of entertaining.
Yep.
They had the Machado brothers, who I'm also hold in very high regard. That's who Orlando Wall is under, is Carlos Machado, and they were often stunt doubles and bad guys and stuff in that. So I would say Walker, Texas Ranger was my favorite.
Good. All right. How about a favorite martial arts movie?
Ooh, I'm going to go with Born a Champion by my buddy Sean Patrick Flannery.
So Sean, I'm actually been trying to get on the show. So he's one of the first ones I mentioned before I even launched the show. And I reached out to him through social media, and he said yes, but I'm very busy. And that was 4.5 years ago. So I'm still holding out hope that I can get him. So fingers crossed. I'll send him a message and he'll usually respond, but he's, like I said, he's very busy, but I'm fingers crossed. I'm still hoping to get him on the show.
Yeah, well, I will send him this when it comes out and try to get him interested in doing it for sure.
Nice. That'd be cool. He just seems like he'd be really fun to talk to.
Yeah, he moved from Houston, moved his family from Houston to Stillwater, Oklahoma, which is just a little over an hour from me recently, because his sons are really good at wrestling, and that's kind of the mecca for youth wrestling in the country. And so he's down there now in Stillwater, not too far from me. And his boys are training at the farm there and at the Cowboy Wrestling Club, and they're tough kids. They're like state champs, two of the best wrestlers in the state. So.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it's pretty much when you need high school wrestling, it's going to be either like Oklahoma or Iowa. Those are pretty much the two top ones in the country. So, all right, final question. This one doesn't have to be a martial arts movie. Any movie you've seen in your whole life, favorite movie fight scene?
Ooh, favorite movie fight scene. Man, you're asking me really good questions that I wish I had more time to think about because there's so many good ones. But the Rocky movies, all those movies were a really big influence on me growing up too. And Rocky was almost like a real person to me because I used them for influence like inspiration in my boxing training. Like I would run with like Rocky quotes in my head and Rocky music, and it would get me pretty riled up. So yeah, I like the fight between him and Tommy Morrison where they went outside after and fought at the end of Rocky V. I thought that was pretty cool.
See, and so many people rip like, oh, that's so unrealistic, but that's that's one of my probably top 5 favorite movie fight scenes. I love that part. Everyone rips on Rocky V, but I love it.
Even when he fought Thunder Lips, who was Hulk Hogan in Rocky III, and the guy threw him out of the ring, and he told Mick to cut his gloves off, and then got up there and pieced him up, and he finished that fight with a rear naked choke. He jumped on his back and choked him. That's how he beat him.
That's right.
And so that was a cool one too. I think Sylvester Stallone is underrated in being able to just get you hyped in fights. I mean, Rocky IV was like a incredible, that Drago fight, and all of them really. I mean, it's funny because you watch boxing movies, any other boxing or MMA and wrestling movies, and nobody seems to have been able to capture a fight quite like he was able to do, you know?
It's the fight, but it's also the training montage.
Yeah, you're right.
That's the key.
Montage, yeah.
Same with Karate Kid. Karate Kid knew, I mean, there was also, they were guys who made it were connected to Rocky. So it's like, but they did the training montage. And that's why the new Karate Kid movie was a good movie, but there was the training montage was like 2 minutes long. It's like, that's not good enough.
I was so sad that there was a pretty clear tone, especially in the first couple of Karate Kids, and even in the third one, which gets lambasted a little bit. It was clearly the same look and feel, and I think is an underrated movie.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love all three of those original ones. And then this new one that came out, I had high hopes for, and it was an entertaining movie, but it was not even in the same vein, in my opinion, as the first Karate Kids. It didn't look or feel like it. It just seemed a little thrown together for me.
It was about 30 minutes too short. It was missing a good 10 to 15 minute training montage, and
I agree.
Ralph was only in it for 20 minutes. I mean,
and it had like kind of video game graphics over the fights and stuff, and it just didn't have the same like drama. I mean, that first Karate Kid had me drawn in, and even the second one, I mean, when he fights Chosen and they're like, he's about to go over the bridge, and Mr. Miyagi goes, "Daniel-san, this no tournament, this for real." He's like basically saying, this dude's gonna kill you if he wins. So try really hard, you know what I mean? I mean, that gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. He walks across that thing, and the guy makes him throw the bridge over, you know? It's like just him and that guy.
No escape.
That guy's already kicked his butt a couple times, and it's like, dude, that's serious, you know?
Yep.
Even in the third one, when Miyagi gets out there and gives him the pep talk, he gets up and starts doing his kata, and then he throws that guy and chops him. I was like, yes!
Yep. Sean Kane and Mike Barnes, he was one of my first 30 guests in the podcast.
Oh, wow. Yeah. He was, you could tell he was a real martial artist. You could tell the way he was throwing his strikes and stuff, that he was a tough guy, you know?
Yeah. I've been lucky. I've had, I think, 4 or 5 people from the Karate Kid universe on my show.
Oh, that's great. So you're a Karate Kid fan too.
Oh, that's what got me started. June of 84. I went to the movie opening night.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Our local Tungsido school was in the lobby handing out free passes afterwards.
Oh, that is cool. Yeah. Tungsido is awesome, man.
Yep. So but I've had him. I had Sensei Fumio Demura on the show before he passed away.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's a big one.
I had Ron Thomas, who played Bobby.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
To go back and listen to those.
But I've had at least 1 or 2 more. So yeah, I've been very lucky. I'm trying to get Ralph Macchio. He's on the dream list. Because I read he actually finally went and when Cobra Kai started, he went and got his actual black belt. He started training again.
Yeah, he earned a black belt, I think, in Goju Karate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, sounds like I'm following some big names then.
Yeah, I've been lucky. They keep saying yes. I mean, you're episode number 238 since I launched about 4.5 years ago. So.
Yeah, well, it was a pleasure to talk to you, and I appreciate your questions. You had some great questions.
Hey, well, before I let you go, any last minute parting words? Anything I forgot to ask you quick that we want to get out there?
No, I mean, if you got martial arts fans listening, I think there's a lot more to martial arts than I realized when I started. Like I said, I just wanted to learn to fight, and I've gotten so much more out of it than I ever thought I would. And I think, teaching and running a gym now, I get calls all the time from people, that want to join. And the most common thing they say is, well, I'm a beginner. I don't have any experience. I mean, is this class really for me? And it's such a strange objection, because of course everyone is a beginner when they start. No one would be any good if they didn't start,
Exactly.
And I think there's some trepidation, and I think that the hardest step to taking martial arts is the first one through the door. And if you go to the right place, you're going to be welcomed, and they're going to have a lot of experience taking you from those day one jitters to getting what you want out of martial arts. And I would just encourage people maybe that haven't done it yet or haven't done it in a while and think that it's too late to just, it's never too late. Get back into it and, get your body back in shape, get your flexibility straight, and confidence will grow again. And I think you'll be glad that you took the first step and came back.
Awesome. I love it. Well, seriously, this has been so much fun. I love your story. I love learning more about you, and I can't wait to get the episode out for listeners.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure, and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.